Hallo.
Hello, great to have you here.
Ich denke, dann kann man auch hier direkt anfangen, wenn
I
hier
think we can just get started. There's nobody here for me anymore. Here we go. I'm a little bit nervous. I think
6 Jahren hier.
the last time I was here is 5 to 6 years ago, but I also think I've been going to Republica for 10 to 12 years and I've seen the growth. It's really nice to be back again. Nothing is as easy as to be perceived as a radical thinker today, or however you showed me idea. It's enough to question the status quo, even just cautiously, or advocate to taking a step forward, to be considered a naive dreamer. It's enough to have confidence in a more just future. And those who are considered realists today are those who do not want to imagine that we can interact with each other in different ways. More approachable, more courageous, more solidaric, and more caring. And the supposedly realistic analysis of the present is pessimistic and fearful. It's egoistic, it's hardened. This supposedly realistic analysis trusts neither itself nor others, and especially nothing good. Do we really want to understand the present and plan a future with this image of humanity? If you look around in this room and look at each other, maybe return the gaze, don't you trust each other? Don't you believe in each other? I only put this in so you can be flirting here. Who do you trust and why? And a few weeks ago, I gave a lecture on time justice at a trade union. Somebody from the audience asked me afterwards, where do you take the courage to pose these big demands? And that surprised me because so far I haven't understood my analyses of the prevailing time culture and the conclusions I draw as particularly courageous. They seem logical to me. Firstly, because I can prove with figures that the way in which we exist, political and social structures restrict access to one's own time. And that is highly unjust and cements power imbalances. Without a radical policy of time that reorganizes at a very basic level what people can use their time for, we cannot attain a just and free world. And secondly, I don't consider my analysis to be courageous but logical and coherent because it's based on values that are considered shared values in our society. And equality is one of those values, secured by the Constitution. Freedom or liberty is another. And beyond that, a democracy that is as inclusive and participatory as possible. As a democratic society, we have to answer the question under which conditions a democracy can remain or become alive and also survive, a democracy in which everyone can truly participate. In addition, nothing is more important to people in Germany than having good friends, staying healthy. So if you, especially from a political perspective, take it seriously which values are widely shared within the society, you can clearly deduce that time policy is a necessary political field that asks the question and resolves it of how our most important values can be lived by as many people as possible. Without this politics of times that I'm calling for, we are living in a constant contradiction with our values, and that alienates us from each other and the world at large. Giving people too many tasks that they cannot refuse, as is often the case with care workers or people in precarious jobs, they are deprived of the opportunity to show interest in something that goes beyond their everyday life of duties. If you don't even have time to think, you especially lack the power to change anything. And this displacement of caregivers and children from the public sphere, and especially the exclusion of mothers that feminists have been criticizing for decades, contradicts the idea of a living democracy. Political discourse that happens without the people that lay the foundation of our society through care, that is a meager discussion. Discourse such as this has no significance for the world and is not politics for everyone. We cannot talk about society ignoring how we're born, how we grow up, and how we die. And we have to re-politicize fundamental care relationships as the foundation of society. And also in social debates, we have to keep working on why we decided for democratic politics and what we want to achieve by it. A time policy that focuses on time prosperity and time justice both is politics for the breadth of society that will make it more resilient to crises and more innovative than current politics can. It secures democracy, and to not fundamentally rethink time policy seems politically negligent to me. So why is the demand for a general reduction in working hours or a 4-day work week, a time culture that includes tasks such as care and thinking, learning, commitment, volunteering, why is that often described as a utopia? When ideas for social change are labeled as utopian by their enemies, it is an attempt to deprive them of their political nature and delegitimize those who formulate them as dreamers. Interpreting utopias as something that is too big, too far unattainable in the future, they cannot endanger the power relations. They're always too far away. They're not tangible. Additionally, that's utopian sounds more elegant than I don't support women's freedoms. Because the demand for a 4-day work week is at its core a feminist project. It challenges the majority of cis men that so far have had excessive working hours and exploited care. It proposes an inclusive model for paid work instead. This demand for a general reduction in working hours is a direct attack on the patriarchal way of life and includes people with chronic illness and disability. Feminist interventions always want to bring something new, free, and open into the world. Time is one of the topics that can break up this old power relation and fulfill a concern of feminist movements to offer more possible options for actions to as many people as possible, and so new degrees of freedom for self-determined life.
And that's time policy is still little known and is fended off because it wants to transform previous power relations. The defenders of an old order have an understandable interest in time policy not establishing itself as a political field. Distributing time fairly is another emancipatory step and radical project. And to call something utopia means refusing to engage with a political idea. Also because the opponents of an idea, for example, the 4-day week, they don't have factual arguments, and it shows that it doesn't work at all. If you label something as an utopia, you don't need a differentiated argument against it. So the concept of utopia is misused, and it prevents the discussion about social change. So there's an example, the redistribution of working hours. It's the core of the reduction of working hours. So to redistribute work in a new and fair way, it's necessary to achieve equality between men and women and to abolish precarious employment. However, describing a 30 or 25 hours week for everyone as unattainable and countering the demand with threats of it doesn't answer the question of how equality, equal care, and living wage can be achieved, or in what time commitment against the right is to happen. So there's an argumentative refusal. Utopia sounds nice, but it's to avoid a differentiated answer and having to show that you have no ideas for equality and good work for all. So, spoiler at this point, the expansion of daycare centers, after-school care, and nursing care is not a solution for an equal life, because you have a needs-based expansion that's decades away, and it also shows that current care work and the conditions of work for people is getting a little more different. The care crisis isn't tackled because it's not understood politically, and that's also due to the fact that equality does not make a difference.
And that's after 75 years of the German Constitution. For anyone who wants to achieve equality in the foreseeable future cannot avoid a new, shorter full-time working norm, which also means that all parties that credibly want to stand up for equality must have time political answers that can be implemented right now and not 25 years from now. So while the label of utopia on the one hand can be problematic if it's used as it is also an important tool for social change, because utopias are a helpful tool for understanding the present. The longings that are formulated in a utopia tell us something about the place and time in which they arise. What we can wish for in the future and imagine is a reaction to what we already know. Utopias refer to limitations and hardships that we would most like to get rid of today. For example, medical research. If you follow that, the fight against cancer, there's a real political power in utopias. And many utopias are not fantastic and unattainable, but an expression of real needs that people feel that are understandable and also appropriate. So often utopias stand for realistic, but above all for benevolent thinking. They are ideas of people that haven't stopped believing in themselves and others, that believe that they themselves and society can serve such values such as justice or solidarity, not only rhetorically, but also to fill them with life. They are a kind of vote of confidence in other people. We do know people in life in which there's enough time for the things that are close to our hearts and that keep both ourselves and the social environment in balance. We know phases in which we have time to learn, think, come up with new ideas. We know moments when we have time to fall in love, to take care of others, but also times when others took care of us. Many people know these tender and powerful normalities that are already reality. These normalities are not science fiction. They are a clearly defined picture of a good and fulfilled life in connection with other people. And we have already felt this life. The utopia of time prosperity is not motivating because it would be an easy and comfortable life and we're all lazy, but because it is the life that connects us with the values that we have learned and want to pass on, and because it resolves this alienation that we feel often from ourselves and from others. Society that is rich in time and in which time is fairly distributed is also a familiar world that we understand intuitively, and it gives people the opportunity to get to know themselves and other people better. It brings us into contact with what makes us human and gives us clarity and orientation, which is also why it is dangerous for existing power relations. Because it's not our ability to work efficiently that is the most important human quality, but our ability to ensure that all people can live with dignity, no matter our differences. The philosopher Ruth Levitt has described utopias not as a goal, but a method in which, quote, provisional versions of a better future would have to be negotiated jointly, and failure would be part of it, end quote. So you start thinking big, sharing tasks, is open, and appreciates the intermediate steps without resting on them too much, and let utopias guide us. But we have to organize the way there concretely, every day and collectively. If we want utopias to strengthen societal ties, then they need to be inclusive. In the political discourse, people have always been put off with the promise that progress is going to happen on its own. And I think that is more magical thinking and not politics. The British planning professor Clara Greed, who deals with visions of the future for cities, maybe in case that interests anyone in Berlin, I can recommend this book, maybe to get away from this car-centric city. And in her book, she writes that people who have the most power in a certain area often refer to a future in which progress and justice would simply come about on their own, because that means they don't have to act themselves and they can just maintain the injustice that exists. And we know this tactic from, for example, the political discourse in Germany, in which, for example, it's always said that we are already achieved equality, but also the technological solutions for reducing CO2 in the atmosphere will be invented the day after tomorrow. And this is a tactic that deliberately delays political solutions. This call to wait for the surprising solutions is a power strategy of those who do not want change and know that they would have to develop better political solutions for goals such as equality or climate protection. And they may be more difficult to convey because people would have to give up some of their privileges, and the changes required might be a little uncomfortable. Read advocates for more critical view of discourses about magically occurring flourishing future, and says instead, quote, "Waiting for the revolution is not politics. We have to create our own realities. We all can imagine and plan things, and that is not selfish. It will not lead to breaks because we are society." End quote. Her analysis for more inclusive urban planning can be translated to time policy, because the forecasts that we would one day be swimming in free time and only work very little have not become reality because, among other things, we have relied too much on this change just happening on its own, and that it would come about through technological progress or growing prosperity. But the driving forces for this change, that's us, that's our ideas as people. How time orders our society is something that we have decided, and that we bring about through our everyday practices every single day. Antje Schrupp, a political scientist, wrote in one of her texts, she described the politics of the everyday and outlines how the 1970s women's movement in Germany has been successful in this way. She writes, quote, "The women's movement has fundamentally reshaped gender relations in Europe exactly in this way, not through one big revolt, but constant modification of what exists. Of course, there are also theoretical texts and original ideas from individuals, but those were then discussed at the kitchen table and in women's centers, sometimes leading to new texts and ideas, but much more often to concrete change that then gradually became reality in personal everyday life. Women left bad relationships, they renegotiated the division of housework, changed the way they dress, sought other professions, all small modifications in themselves that in some brought about enormous change in society." So changing our everyday lives is a very powerful form of politics, because the distribution of time is also a result of political agreement. It is also politically negotiable. We can discuss our time culture and criticize it, rethink it, demand it confidently, and practice new ways where possible. Because waiting changes nothing. Power has to be challenged by banding together for a cause. And that is also the most important insight for a political understanding of time. Time expands when we engage with others. A society that drives us into isolation restricts the inherent power in our time. Hannah Arendt wrote, quote, "Power arises between people when they act together and disappears once they disperse," end quote. So too often we believe we don't have time to be engaged, but we have to do exactly the opposite. Spend as much time together as we need to become capable again of acting together. We must fight for this time and defend it.
To have this time accessible, we need to make sure that political engagement is a form of necessary society care work. We realize our full scope of action of freedom through the fact that the world matters and we can get involved. Well, a man told me in a conversation that there's currently no concept of freedom that counters the neoliberal reinterpretation of freedom. For example, driving fast cars and selfishness. What can I say? I can just read more feminist literature because there's a lot of discourse. And for example, Eva von Redeker or my book or John Tronto, who writes in Carrying Democracy. A truly free society gives people the freedom to care. A truly free society gives people equal opportunities to be well cared for and to engage in caring relationships. Without the care and attention of others, we are not free. Without care relationships, we are just a person speeding on the highway, driving in circles because no one is waiting for them and stroking their hair when they come home. Societies that want to offer freedom to all people and have a future, they have to use care as a center for their practice. The world where people are free because they care for each other, it already exists in many places. And if policy commits to freedom and equality, they have to open the world to everyone. When people can care well for each other, they build stable relationships and they experience belonging and self-efficiency. Belonging and self-efficiency are the foundation for people to be informed and to be confidently and to say what they need and know to what harms them. The care revolution gives people the necessary time and strength to resist domination and oppression and to build a world together democratically where the future is open and hopeful. So we have to understand political engagement as indispensable societal care work without which we can't work. Like a baby dies without care, this situation, if we need the time for engagement as a right and to take care for everyone having this right, and that engagement isn't a luxury. So if we understand it as a right to care for others, for the environment, for the democracy and the future, we can also demand the right for the necessary time for it, because the caring action and a vibrant democracy where people can be involved, they are inseparably connected, and you have to have sufficient and generously allocated time, and you need the time for this engagement. Why it is worthwhile to think utopically for a new time culture can be seen in a quote from Ruth Levitas. The utopian approach allows us not only to imagine what a different society might look like, but it also enables us to imagine how it would feel to inhabit it. So if you have to approach time justice, and it's a hard political fight. We can see this week. But if we get a feeling for it, we get used to it. We can see time as something primarily giving us a good feeling and to strengthen our relationships between. And it's a radical interpretation of the experience of time stress, time poverty, and isolation. And this change of perspective is political resistance. A new time culture is not utopia, because it kind of already exists in the imagination of many people. And the current time culture can only be changed when enough people are convinced that they want to live more justly with others, and that they understand that mutual and reliable care relationships are the basis of societal change. Because if we care well for each other, that makes so many people more capable of acting. This have to be part of the care revolution if we want to get to our targets. It's always important to have more time for friends, for our kids, the participation in society, and the tasks that give us meaning. These simple wishes I just stated, to be rested, to be connected, to be loved, and capable of acting, This should never be confused with utopia. In translation, utopia is a place that can't be, that doesn't exist. We shouldn't take it for granted that is